You've already had this thought, the violent kind, the one that felt too dark to be yours. And since that moment, something shifted, not in the thought, but in how much space you gave it. That is what this video is about, not the thought, the promotion. Maybe it happens after a conversation that ended slightly wrong, after a mistake, or in the middle of an otherwise normal day. A thought arrives with force. What if I ruin this? What if something dark lives in me? What if I cannot trust my own mind? At first, it is only weather. But if you keep receiving it the same way, the risk is not just discomfort. The risk is obedience. You start reorganizing your attention, your mood, your body, your choices around something that never earned authority. By the end of this video, you will see the exact moment that happens. Not the moment the thought appears, the moment it is enthroned. That is the real turning point. Here is the first thing to understand clearly. A violent thought is not powerful because it arrives violently. It can enter like a storm and still remain only weather. The mistake begins when you start serving it, when you stop meeting it as an event and start treating it as a ruler. Most people assume the danger lives inside the content of the thought, but the deeper danger is usually the rank you assign it. The mind produces movement. That is its function. Not every movement deserves office. Not every image deserves belief. But intrusive thoughts become sticky because they arrive with two things at once: force and imagery. And that combination is expensive. Because once the thought arrives, imagination begins working for it. You do not just hear the thought. You start seeing its world. You picture the failure, the humiliation, the inner corruption, the disaster already unfolding. Now the thought is no longer a sentence. It has become an atmosphere. And once it becomes an atmosphere, the body begins answering it. This is where many sincere practitioners get confused. They think, if my body reacted, the thought must have been real. If my chest tightened, if my stomach dropped, then I must have touched truth. Not necessarily. Sometimes you touched influence. Pause there, because this is where the whole thing becomes usable. What makes an intrusive thought dangerous is not its arrival. It is the alliance that follows. The moment your imagination begins furnishing it, the moment your attention begins circling it, the moment your body begins bowing to it, the moment your behavior begins consulting it, that is the enthronement. Think of two people receiving the same disturbing thought. The first receives it, feels the jolt, and notices, something harsh just crossed the room of my mind. The second receives it, then immediately asks, why did I think that? What does it say about me? What if it means I want it? What if this is who I really am? Same intrusion, completely different outcome. Because in the second case, the thought was not only heard, it was fed, given image, repetition, emotion, and status. That is why some thoughts seem to grow teeth. Not because they carried law in themselves, but because they were given force by repeated inward agreement. Now let me make this even simpler. An intrusive thought usually takes control in three movements. First, it appears. Second, it fascinates. Third, it starts issuing consequences. The third is the one that matters most. You start avoiding something. You start confessing to a thought that never deserved confession. You start checking yourself constantly. You start shaping the day around a passing mental event. That is no longer disturbance. That is governance. And once a thought governs, it changes more than mood. It changes position. You move from being the one who sees to being the one dragged. Here is where we are. We have not said intrusive thoughts are harmless. We have said something more precise. Their main power is borrowed power. Borrowed from your attention, your imagination, your compliance. What comes next matters most. If enthronement is the real problem, the release does not begin by fighting every thought to the death. It begins by refusing office. Not every thought needs to be expelled. Some simply need to be denied rank. That changes the entire nature of the inner work. Because the question is no longer, how do I make sure this never appears again? The question becomes, at what point did I begin serving it? That question is cleaner, stronger, more truthful. And here is the relief inside it. If the power came from enthronement, you are not trapped inside the thought's content. You are standing at the gate of promotion. You can notice the sentence without crowning it. You can feel the jolt without building a world around it. You can witness the image without moving your life under its weather. This is not denial. It is hierarchy. A passing thought belongs low. A ruling principle belongs high. Suffering begins when the order is reversed. So if you have been tormented by intrusive thoughts, do not measure yourself by what passes through you. Measure by what you seat, what you feed, what you obey. Because most people are not ruled by their darkest thought. They are ruled by the moment they decided they had to kneel before it. And that moment can change. Not by pretending nothing happened, not by becoming numb, but by recovering inner rank. A thought arrived, you saw it. It struck the air, but it did not become king. That is the only difference that matters. And if you learn to feel that difference early, the mind becomes less like a haunted house and more like a kingdom with a living center. Not empty, not silent, but ordered. And you already know which one you want.